Hi there.
Hi everyone. That last talk was great. It was a good segue into a lot of the stuff that we'll be talking about, so excellent. So first off, hi, I'm Stevie. I'm a product manager at Animoto. If you guys don't know what Animoto is, it's a web application that makes it really easy for people to make beautiful video slideshows online. So it's think of it as an application that has a lot of stuff going on within it. And so as a product manager, it's really important for me as we're rolling out new features to understand at a very deep level how customers are using new features, is it driving the right sort of behavior, all the usual things that you want to know as a product manager.
I'm Lincoln.
Really well.
Yeah, it's seamless. So I run data at Animoto, and I also run our backend platform team. And so I'm coming to this from a perspective of wanting to roll out a system that's flexible, observable, can understand what's going on. There's sort of well-defined semantics for the things that are going on in it. And I want to be able to, extend it and make it do things for us. I wanted to make my job easier, not harder. And a while back, our marketing folks came knocking, and this is kind of before we really had much of a sort of data program at Animoto, and they were like, well, we're trying to do some stuff where we'd like to sort of get a better view of what different kinds of users are doing in our system. We'd like to apply our own segmentation to our data, and they were they were kind of like, you seem like you might know this, which, by the way, I didn't. Show us in GA how we're going to do this, and basically it was like, no, I can't do that because I don't think we can do that with GA. We can't join it to our own data, provide our own sort of segmentation on top of that stuff, and so that led us to start looking at alternatives, and ultimately that led us to Snowplow. And so we rolled out some tracking, some Snowplow tracking. We did our sort of comparison against GA to make sure we were doing it right, kind of, and all that stuff. And hey, look at that! We've got some users in there, and we've got our orders table, and we can join it with our users table and get our own segmentation, and we're done. Good, sweet.
But not quite. So the reason we wanted to, it was funny when Lincoln brought up the fact that he was talking and we started riffing on ideas, I was like, we should just talk about this together because we've been in dialogue a lot over the last 6 to 12 months about what does it actually look like to integrate Snowplow into an organization that's using GA and what does that transition look like. So this talk is going to be mostly a dialogue between product management and data analytics around Snowplow. So to integrate Snowplow right, we've had to change the way that we as product managers think about things and also improve our processes and even just the way we think about how to staff for these efforts. So we still have a long ways to go, but we're just hoping that some of the learnings that we've had over the past 6 to 12 months could help other folks that are trying to go through similar transitions. So let's dive right in. So first question, how do we track feature usage? So after we integrated Snowplow, I heard all of the great things that Snowplow could do. I'm really glad you brought up the example about sampling, because we hated sampling, wanted to really drill in and understand very specific customer behavior and go to the 30,000 foot view and then really drill in, and we knew we couldn't do that with GA. But making the mental translation from what we used to do in GA as product managers, where you have these simple concepts of page views and events, and you can just work with your web developer and tie them together and then see how it all works. That was very simple, and now things are more complicated. So I was just trying to figure out, so for me, just early on, trying to understand, well, how does a page view work in Snowplow? That was a very complicated thing for me to get my head wrapped around. So, but
you wanted more than page views, right? You had certain things you actually
page views and then virtual page views. I'm not sure how many of you guys use that, where you're bastardizing this concept of a page view for any interaction that's happening with any flow that you can imagine within your product. So it was like, yeah, Lincoln, how do we do virtual page views within Snowplows? Because this flow is very important for us.
Right. So you'd want to say, oh, how do I analyze that? How do I tell how many users are engaging with a particular feature? I want to change the background color. How many people are doing that? And our old model would be okay, well, we'll decide that's what we want to track, and then make a special URL for that thing that's used background color or something like that, /used background color, which is not a URL that exists, and it's ridiculous. And when moving to Snowplow, we were like, oh, well, we don't have to be limited by that anymore. Like, we're living in a world beyond page views. We don't have to just do that. And really what it means is we can build a vocabulary of things that are very particular to us, right? And you know, so for example, this is like a abbreviated form of an event that we built out to track, you know, when users are doing a particular activity in the site in the application. And really it came down to like, well, we're just thinking about the core activities that users are going to be doing, and we're going to instrument for that and build it out specifically for that purpose, rather than jamming it into some other tool.
So one of the things that was difficult for me to understand is why, that sounds great, and this sounds a lot more robust from some sort of data point of view, but why can't I just use virtual page? What's the limitation of using virtual page views to do that sort of thing?
Well, it's almost like we just had to think about it too much up front, right? We had to say like, oh, this particular thing, we wanted to do this, right? And instead, once we did have to sort of do a little bit of planning, thinking about the core activities that users do. You know, they sign up, they order things, you know, they make purchases, they subscribe to things, they you know, use features, right? They watch videos. There are these certain core activities, right? We had to think about what those were, but then we were able to sort of capture everything without too much regard of what we were capturing or thinking too much about how we were going to use it down the line, so we could sort of get a much richer set of data, you know, up front.
Sorry.
I should say the other thing that was important about it is that it also allowed us to sort of separate those core activities from the context in which they happened. So you know, a lot of times a user would like engage with a feature, say like they're going to change the title of their video. Sometimes they would do that from within the video creation application or the main creation flow, we call it. Sometimes they would do that from the page where they watch the video. So we were able to separate the core activity engaging with that feature versus, from the context in which it happened, and that really gave us this cool way to sort of augment our analytics sort of after the fact. It gave us this extensibility later, and then we could apply sort of our own views on top of that stuff even farther down the line in the analytics stage.
Cool. That stuff makes a ton of sense, and I love the idea. And Lincoln talked to us a bunch about the flexibility of this tool and how you could actually kind of abstract these concepts. But one of the things that was touched on before is that I just want to be able to easily see this data, right? And so I love having a more robust back-end data way to store that data and to interact with it, but still, I want an easy way for us to be able to look at the data and analyze it and do meaningful things with it. So it's really hard. It's harder now in this new world.
Yeah. So I mean, there is a degree of complexity that we're adding here, right? And I think, you know, having lived with the sort of page view analytics stuff, and now we're pushing it farther into like really, you know, this feature usage stuff. I think the trade-off is kind of worth it. It is hard, but it's actually in service of making us be able to be more responsive to, you know, product managers and things like that, because we can sort of redefine. Once we've got this rich feature set or data set, we can later on say, oh, well, this particular event represents some goal or conversion or whatever, and we can sort of redefine things like funnels and flows later, rather than having to like sort of design that all up front. And to respond to our own investigation a little easier. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So to come back, once we started to go down the Snowplow route and we got very deep in here and we were able to answer questions that we hadn't been able to do before, which was doing all of these things in terms of looking at user flows and being able to correlate it with really meaningful product data or goals or conversions, there was just a lot more steps to get from the point of tracking it to actually being able to use that data in a meaningful way. And I think that for me as a product manager has been one of the most painful parts, where it's not as, the whole tracking and analytics is not as self-serve as it used to be.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think we've definitely run into some pain around visualization, right? Like, as a gentleman here from Canary said, you know, like that's a separate product. We've got the data collections part, right? But looking at that data is hard. It's hard to figure out like what the right way to sort of make that intuitive or make that explorable. That's really tough. And unfortunately, I can't say that we haven't solved that problem.
Yeah, and we do use Looker really heavily, which has allowed there to be a lot more self-serve data analysis by other PMs. But but that's more on kind of the business metrics. But in terms of just the basic page flows and sessions, it feels like we've taken 2 steps back, like 2 steps forward and 1 step back there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so GA, right, like gives you these like sort of point and click. You're like immediately you've got these like pre-built things to visualize, like sessions and flows and whatever. But it strikes me that when saying, oh, where is our visualization of like page flow and sessions and all that sort of stuff, we should actually be asking, like, are we visualizing the right things? Because we're talking about building these custom events and like these custom, contextual data and all that sort of stuff. Maybe we should think about like, well, the session and the flow, what a page flow is or whatever. Maybe that just doesn't apply to us, or maybe like whatever a session is, I don't know. Maybe there's this other abstraction, whatever that session, whatever counts as a session for us. Well, probably we need to own that definition. Probably, like that's pretty core to like that's going to really shape the decisioning that we have from this data. So we really need to own it and develop it ourselves. Even though it kind of sucks to like take that leap right off the bat.
It's forced us to have discussions I don't think we would have had before in terms of, oh, well, we have a lot of different concepts of a session, right? We have a project editing session, we have a video views session, we have different activities that are happening that all of these events that are happening together constitute one meaningful start and end to what a user is doing, and we want to be able to define that. So I didn't even know we needed to think about that, so that was pretty valuable.
Totally. And we've even had like, we've got ideas of, you think about your normal like web visit, right? A user is going to come to our site. They're going to start editing a project, right? That's a sort of an editing session. Then they're going to flip over and start watching a video, maybe some video they had before. Maybe they're commenting on a video that a colleague made. That's some video viewing sessions. Maybe they have multiple of them going on simultaneously. Or maybe, and that's all within one web session, right? Then you've got something that even is beyond that, right? You've got participation, say, in A/B tests, right? We've augmented our data with Optimizely data, so we know when people are participating in A/B tests. That's a session that essentially spans multiple web view sessions. It's like at a sort of a macro level, right? But it's still this grouping that's sort of like a session. So we really had to start rethinking, like, what are the core concepts that we're actually looking to visualize, analyze, et cetera.
So we've hit some snags adopting Snowplow along the way, and I think one question that'd be fun to talk about is if you were to do this over, if you were going to kind of know what you know now, how would you do things differently, bringing Snowplow into Animoto?
I think the biggest thing that would have changed the way we implemented, and I think we did a lot of things well, and I think there's a lot of really great stuff that we're doing with it. But things that I think would have really fundamentally changed where we are today is if we'd more fully embraced the idea that we were building a really full-fledged custom product for ourselves, right? We were building a new set of abstractions, a new tool chain for dealing with those abstractions. We had to like think about what kind of analytics we wanted to apply to them, what sort of visualizations we are, and run it like an actual product. We would ship, measure our engagement with those things, iterate on that stuff, but we'd have to think about staffing for that, QA, all that stuff, user research.
There's been times where we've wired things up. I've been working with a web developer to wire something up, and then I'll hear, oh, the schema's wrong. I'm like, what do you mean the schema? Isn't it just what it is? And so realizing that we have to have better process for doing that, and to have much clearer validations for the data, and just have we have to spend the time to make it work well. And I don't think we understood that well enough.
Right. Like how many people write integration tests or unit tests for are you putting something into GA properly? Not many people, I think, do that. But we've built actual technology to break our builds when we're not doing things, putting stuff into Snowplow properly, right? And that's something we wouldn't have thought about, we didn't think about until we realized, oh yeah, this is like a whole product that we got to build. So yeah, I think that we really should have just breathed that in and made that our reality. But yeah, I don't know, those are some of our experiences, and those are some of the questions that occurred to us. We've been using Snowplow now for 18 months, 2 years maybe, but would be interested if you guys have any questions for us.
What were some things that you did to help kind of tie together those meta sessions that you're talking about? Was it changing schema or kind of different drawings, or kind of curious?
Yeah, so there's a number of things that can happen. I mean, like there's also things like identity stitching, so you're stitching users from logged out state to logged in state, and then back propagating that stuff. So now we know that this is user such and such. Apply that to previous events so that we can tell that there's a continuity there. There's also cross-device stuff. And a lot of the same concepts apply. So we have, the one is like the A/B testing or the optimizely context that we've done, which when a user is bucketed into an experiment variation, we attach our context. And I don't know, are you guys all familiar with like contexts in Snowplow? Basically little payloads that you can attach to any event in Snowplow that have their own schema and all that stuff. And you can attach multiple contexts. So in this case, if you are bucketed into an optimizely experiment, we attach a context that says, okay, we've got this experiment and this variation. And then later on during analysis, we find those events and then propagate that forward to any events that we're going to consider as part of that thing, as part of our analysis. So now we're saying that user is sort of, until that experiment and variation are done, that person is part of that experiment, so we can compare then users' behavior even outside of like that particular experiment, like what did they do differently? And then later we can also say, well, for people that were in that experiment, was their long-term behavior different? Like did something else happen where like then they like subscribe, their renewal rate is different or whatever. So we've sort of stickily attached that to that user, which is important for a subscription business.
If you're going to migrate tomorrow from something like GA, what would you say is the most important thing to start off right off like the bat with the project? Would it be something like pulling together kind of a migration sheet where you're saying, this is the reports and these are the metrics and dimensions that we use to classify in GA. Here's how they're going to transfer over into our Snowplow integration? Would it be the modeling within Looker, whatever BI, or would you say it's just straightforward, kind of the start of it, just the integration and actually implementing code?
And I think that would largely depend on exactly your business and what you're trying to get out of it. But I think for the way we approached it was we said, well, we have these certain reports that are present that we know we use from the GA world, and we have these things that we're trying to we'd like to replace those with Snowplow because we want to segment differently or whatever. So first we got a baseline and say like, can we even get the same ballpark stuff out of both sides? And then on that Snowplow side, once we are sort of doing that, so we reproduce some key set of reports, then that gives us some confidence that, hey, like we're kind of doing it right. We can look at that data, make sure that, say, the user information that we're attaching is present, right? Then we can start doing things in Looker or whatever to like make reports that are divergent from the GA stuff, right? I think at the same time, depending on your business, I think thinking about really what the like core concepts and user activities or the actual real actual events that are pertinent to you, starting to think about those and how you would model those is also I would start doing that kind of in parallel. I think for us, we would have really not been. I think it could have been actually detrimental if we had jumped straight into like this new world of like completely custom events. I think that would have been a little bit hard for us to swallow, partly because there wasn't as much precedent at that time that we were aware of anyway. It may be different as this kind of thing is growing and there's more community. Maybe that would be different now. I'm not totally sure, but sorry, it was vague and rambling, but.
Okay, so in the kind of the 2 years you've been using Snowplow, there's been a ton of like changes and releases in the platform and stuff. Like, are there any changes that have kind of changed the way that you think about Snowplow or the way that you use Snowplow internally in those like 2 years?
By the way, you should jump in.
Yeah, I can't think of anything from the PM side, kind of the front end.
I feel like I mean, just at a very like conceptual level, like, and I think it was when we implemented mobile, in like iOS, that it kind of flipped some bit in my head where I started thinking more about like, almost like everything is a context. And I think of like, almost, it's like every time I, track some event, essentially I'm just like writing down a root ID, but everything else is basically contextual information. Like there's very few other things that I think actually are core to like the event tracking. And that's partly because we're moving away from like thinking of it as like purely like sort of web analytics. We're really tracking like event data that for us is largely feature usage or, a handful of like order events, comparatively like things like, and really the page stuff is just like the user happened to be on a web page or happened to be on this screen. That's sort of all sort of side part. And I don't know that materially changes like what we are doing with it, but it's a different sort of conceptual thing. And then also I think that like rethinking about like what our actual model, like what the models are. When we were having this conversation about page flow, and we're like, well, what is page flow? Like how would we even apply that concept to like this feature usage stuff where like the sort of state space is not just a finite set of pages. You've got this continually varying like, all hex values, for the background color. What I'm going to show a transition graph between that and like every other possible color value, like that's kind of ludicrous. Like we have to kind of rethink that concept, or how we're going to like, group things together and whatever. So anyway, yeah.
There's a quick question, sorry, in the corner. Quick question sort of on like, the data model you kind of went on. It sounds like with all these contexts, there's a lot of really rich information. And I'm kind of curious how long it took you to sort of develop the data model on top of that, or if you have something, I guess, after that sort of gave you the flexibility to look at everything you wanted to get complemented.
We're not done yet. I think we're still like very primitive actually in the way that we're doing it. I think again, getting back to like the need to invest in like, this has like a full-fledged product. Like we basically need someone. We don't have this person right now. If you're interested, let me know. But we need somebody who's like really is just full-time kind of just like modeling that data. And like, we have like sort of data engineering, we have analytics, but like it's accentuated, like it's really accented the need for somebody who's really, really good at like working with this event data and like just doing like sort of data modeling. That's sort of apart from reporting and, it's apart from the pipeline stuff.
Kind of things, I guess, there's separated off in a way that like reporting that's functioning now and sort of satisfactory now, you can still work with the data model in a way that doesn't break everything.
Yeah, and that's our goal actually, because we can basically give this exact same talk about like our implementation of Looker, for example, and like how we've sort of developed that stuff. But our goal in general as a data platform internally is like make sure that application developers can move as fast as they can and change as much as they want to. And that's things like schemas and stuff in Snowplow are helpful for that regard. And then we also want to make sure that the analytics side, they can do it, whatever they need to do. And we've got they're sort of nicely decoupled, so that as we're developing some new model, we can just sort of build that up, slowly start like rephrasing reports in terms of this new model, and then sort of swap it out. That's our goal. I mean, failed many times at achieving that, but that's the idea. We should probably let somebody else talk, but you can come talk to us later if you have more questions.
Thanks.
Cool. Thanks.
That's amazing. Thanks, guys.